Senator John Kennedy didn't just walk into that hearing room to ask questions. He walked in with a strategy that would slowly tighten until there was nowhere left to go. And by the time Pam Bondi realized what was happening, the conversation had already shifted from routine oversight to something far more serious. Because this wasn't about scoring political points. This was about receipts, paper trails, legal standards, and a process that suddenly didn't seem to add up. And just when it felt like the situation couldn't get more intense, the mention of Jeffrey Epstein and blackmail claims pushed everything into an entirely different category.
General, welcome. Let's suppose that I'm appointed special counsel at the Department of Justice, and I go to the telecommunication companies, the phone companies. Let's single out AT&T, and I say, look, I know you're busy, but I want to see a copy of the phone records of a sitting United States senator. They're not going to just give them to me, are they?
No, Senator, of course not.
In fact, they're probably going to ask me what planet I just parachuted in from, aren't they?
Yes, Senator.
They're going to tell me to come back with a subpoena, aren't they?
Yes, Senator.
Okay. What do I have to show in that subpoena to get those phone records of a sitting? Did I mention it was a sitting United States senator? I can't remember. What do I have to show to get the phone records of a sitting United States senator?
Yes, Senator, there were actually 8 sitting United States senators.
Yeah, I heard that.
And you would have to have cause.
I'm sorry, what do I have to show?
You would have to have cause to get the subpoena.
Good cause or probable cause?
Probable cause.
Okay. Probable cause, or if it's a subpoena deuces take them, good cause, to show what?
You would need good cause for a subpoena ducis tecum, and what you would have to show is that you believed a crime had been committed, or there was a possibility of a crime, or that could lead to other crimes. We frequently, in criminal enterprises, subpoena cell phones.
By the sitting United States senator?
Senator, they would have to have believed you were part of a criminal conspiracy, is my understanding.
Would a judge have to sign off on it? On the subpoena?
Yes, Senator. Well, for a subpoena ducis tecum, Jack Smith probably took it straight to the judge.
Now, the phone companies, particularly their general counsel, if they're worried about civil liability, even with a subpoena to get the phone records of a sitting United States senator. Did I mention it was a sitting United States senator?
Yes, Senator.
The general counsel for that phone company, let's say AT&T, they have the right to seek to quash that subpoena, don't they?
Phone companies frequently do that.
Yeah. And a smart general counsel for that phone company is going to call the sitting United States senator and say, would you like to weigh in on this? Would you like me to quash the subpoena? We're talking about invading someone's privacy here by a sitting United States senator. Could the general counsel for the phone company do that?
Well, Senator, if they believe that a crime could have been committed, they could not tip off the person who committed the crime. Again, I can't comment on details of this particular case.
I'm just asking you theoretically.
I've never seen you commit a crime, Senator Kennedy.
But let's suppose, okay, they didn't want to tip off the sitting United States senator, but the phone company and the general counsel for the phone company, or companies, if there were more than one involved, could say, you know, this is serious as an aneurysm. This is serious as 4 heart attacks and a stroke. This is a sitting United States senator. So general counsel would likely advise the CEO, well, you need to file a motion to quash. The telephone companies could have contested those subpoenas, could they not?
Hypothetically, yes. I can't talk about the facts of this particular case.
We're talking hypothetical.
Senator, subpoenas are issued all the time through phone companies working with the general counsel.
But they can
for
file a motion to
cause.
quash.
They could, yes.
Yeah.
In any case.
And if they should have filed a motion to quash, and a reasonable person would have filed a motion to quash, because this is a sitting United States senator, and they didn't file a motion to quash, they would incur civil liability, wouldn't they?
Senator, typically phone companies follow a subpoena from a United States attorney.
I know they do, but they don't have to.
They could challenge it, Senator.
Yeah. And if they don't challenge it, they better have a damn good reason. Right? Right?
Senator, I can't talk about the facts of this particular
This is just
case.
a hypothetical.
In general, hypothetically, Senator, maybe they didn't recognize any of the names of the 8 sitting United States senators.
Hypothetically.
That was a joke.
Or maybe they should have gone to Amazon and buy some testicles online. Instead of just saying, sure, I'll just show you the phone records of a sitting United States senator on the basis of an administrative subpoena. Now, do you have copies of the subpoena applications for
Yes,
these
Senator,
8
Senator, I can't discuss anything regarding this
You can't
case
even
with
tell me
you.
if you have copies?
I can't discuss any of this.
All right,
with
when are
I'm
you
sorry.
going to, General, when are you going to be able to discuss it?
I can't discuss whether there is or is not a pending investigation,
I understand,
Senator. This
but
was
let's
just
assume
brought to light
if
by
there is a
Director
pending
Patel.
investigation, I don't want this to get swept under the rug, okay? Because I think you're going to get pushed back from all quarters. I think the telecommunication companies are going to be all over you like a bad rash because they've got liability here for just turning over these records when they knew what was going on. I think some FBI agents may have some liability here. I think a special counsel might have some liability here. If I were your special counsel and you had appointed me and I wanted to get the records of a sitting United States senator, is that something you would expect me to tell you as Attorney General of the United States?
They better have.
Yeah.
And
Do we know in this instance of the 8 sitting United States senators if they told Attorney General Garland?
Senator, I just learned about this very recently, as did Director Patel, and we cannot discuss the details. I don't know many of the details.
Well, maybe we ought to get Attorney General Garland here. Do you know if the special counsel told FBI Director Wray? Is that something? Let me put it another way. If I were your special counsel and you were the director of the FBI and I'm trying to get the phone records of a sitting United States senator, did I mention it was a sitting United States senator? Is that something that you would expect me to tell you as director of the FBI?
In general, I would believe the FBI would help execute the subpoenas.
Yeah.
To the businesses.
Okay, I want to switch to another subject in the 12 minutes that I have left, since everybody else got to go over. I've got to ask you about this, General. Secretary Howard Lutnick on October 1 gave an interview to the New York Post about Mr. Epstein. And he described Mr. Epstein as, quote, the greatest blackmailer ever, close quote. Have you reviewed that transcript of that interview?
I have not reviewed the transcript, but I saw the clip of it.
Okay. It appears that Secretary Lutnick was Mr. Epstein's next-door neighbor. In fact, their townhomes shared a wall. And the reporter that was talking to Mr. Lutnick, she asked how other prominent men could have been associated with Epstein when Mr. Lutnick could immediately sense that he was a, quote, pervert. And then Secretary Lutnick said, or rather the reporter said, did they see it and ignore it? Do you remember that from the interview?
I do.
And Commerce Secretary Lutnick said, no, they participated. And then Commerce Secretary Lutnick goes on to say, quote, that's what his MO was. You know, get a massage, get a massage. And what happened in that massage room, I assume, was a video. This guy was the greatest blackmailer ever, blackmailed people. That's how he had money, end quote. Is that true?
Senator, as our July memo said, we did not uncover evidence. This case has gone through 3 administrations, as well as former U.S. Attorney Alex Acosta.
I know that, Pam. But have you interviewed Secretary Lutnick?
No, Senator.
Do you plan to?
If he wants to talk to the FBI or the FBI wants to talk to him, that is more than on.
Don't you think you ought to talk to him after this interview?
Senator, if Howard Lutnick wants to speak to the FBI and if Director Patel wants to speak to Howard Lutnick, absolutely.
Okay. Maybe we ought to get Mr. Lutnick in here too, Mr. Chairman.
What unfolded wasn't just another hearing. It was a moment that raised a simple but uncomfortable question. What happens when the system meant to protect accountability refuses to show its own work? It started with what sounded like a harmless hypothetical. Kennedy leaned in with a calm, almost casual tone, asking what would happen if a special counsel tried to obtain the phone records of a sitting United States senator. Not a random citizen, not a low-level official, a sitting senator. He repeated that phrase again and again, not for emphasis alone, but to anchor the gravity of what he was building. Bondi responded the way anyone familiar with procedure would expect. You'd need a subpoena. You'd need probable cause. A judge would have to sign off. Telecom companies wouldn't just hand over that kind of information without legal backing. Everything sounded normal, even routine. But Kennedy wasn't asking for clarity. He was laying a foundation, brick by brick, making sure every requirement was stated clearly on the record. As the exchange continued, the tone didn't change, but the weight of it did. Kennedy walked through each step of the process, forcing agreement on every legal safeguard that's supposed to protect against abuse. Probable cause, judicial approval, the right of companies to challenge subpoenas, the expectation that such an extreme action would be handled with the highest level of scrutiny. It all sounded like a textbook example of how the system is supposed to work. And that's exactly why what came next landed so hard. Because once those rules were clearly established, Kennedy introduced the twist that turned the entire conversation on its head. This wasn't about one senator. It was about 8. 8 sitting United States senators whose phone records were reportedly obtained. The room didn't erupt, but the shift was unmistakable. Suddenly, the hypothetical wasn't hypothetical anymore. It was a scenario with real implications, real consequences, and a growing list of unanswered questions. How did this happen? Who approved it? And most importantly, did anyone follow the rules that had just been carefully outlined moments earlier? Even without direct accusations, the implication was clear: something didn't line up. That's when Bondi's responses began to change. Up until that point, she had answered within the framework of standard procedure. But when Kennedy moved from theory to specifics, the answers became more cautious, more limited. He asked a simple question: do you have copies of the subpoena applications? Not classified details, not sensitive names, just whether the documents existed and were available. And instead of a straightforward answer, he got something else entirely. She said she couldn't discuss it. Not the contents, not the context, not even the existence. In a system built on documentation, that kind of silence carries weight. Because the paperwork isn't just a formality, it's the proof that the process was followed. Without it, there's no way to verify whether the legal standards that were just outlined were actually met. Kennedy didn't need to raise his voice or accuse anyone directly. The contrast between the detailed process he had just walked through and the refusal to acknowledge the documents spoke for itself. It wasn't about what was said anymore. It was about what wasn't. But Kennedy didn't stop there. Instead, he expanded the scope, bringing in another layer that added even more pressure. Telecom companies like AT&T weren't passive players in this process. They had rights. They could challenge subpoenas. They could file motions to quash if something didn't seem justified. And if they didn't, they could face legal consequences themselves. Kennedy made it clear this wasn't just about government action. It was about whether private companies had fulfilled their responsibility to question that action when necessary. The implication was subtle but powerful. If those companies handed over sensitive data without pushing back, why? Did they believe everything was legally sound? Or did they choose not to question it? Kennedy didn't answer that question directly, but he didn't need to. By laying out the options, he allowed the audience to draw their own conclusions. And in doing so, he introduced a broader concern: the possibility of a system where multiple institutions operate in sync without meaningful oversight. Just as the conversation reached that point, Kennedy shifted gears again. This time, he introduced something that seemed unrelated at first, but quickly proved to be anything but. He brought up a public interview involving Howard Lutnick, who had described Epstein in striking terms. According to the interview, Epstein wasn't just involved in wrongdoing. He was allegedly described as someone who used blackmail as a central strategy, and not just against unknown figures, but potentially against powerful individuals. Kennedy's approach here was careful. He didn't present the claims as confirmed facts. Instead, he asked whether Bondi had reviewed the interview, whether she had followed up, whether anyone had investigated those statements further. The answers were again limited. She had seen clips, but hadn't reviewed the full transcript. There was no indication of a deeper inquiry. And once again, the pattern repeated itself. A significant claim, raised publicly, met with minimal engagement from those in a position to examine it. That's where the narrative began to connect. On one side, there was a situation involving potential surveillance of lawmakers, with unclear documentation. On the other, there were claims about blackmail involving high-profile figures, with no clear follow-up. Different issues, but a similar theme, questions raised, but not fully pursued. Kennedy didn't need to state the connection explicitly. By placing them side by side, he allowed the pattern to emerge naturally. As the exchange moved toward its final moments, the focus shifted from individual questions to a broader perspective. This wasn't just about one hearing, one official, or one set of documents. It was about how the system operates when faced with uncomfortable questions. Do institutions respond with transparency, or do they rely on silence and deflection? Do they investigate claims thoroughly, or do they move past them without full examination? These weren't new questions, but in this context, they felt more immediate. What made the moment stand out wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a single decisive answer. It was the methodical way Kennedy built his case, using the system's own rules as the framework. He didn't argue against the process, he relied on it. And by doing so, he highlighted the gap between what the process requires and what was being demonstrated in real time. That gap became the central issue more than any specific allegation. By the end, the room hadn't exploded into chaos. There was no dramatic conclusion, no final statement that tied everything together neatly. Instead, there was something else, a lingering sense that important questions had been raised, but not fully addressed. And in a setting where documentation and accountability are supposed to provide clarity, that absence stood out more than any answer could have. Because in the end, this wasn't about proving a single claim or resolving a single issue. It was about exposing a pattern where critical information isn't easily accessible, where follow-up isn't guaranteed, and where the responsibility to explain doesn't always result in explanation. And when that pattern becomes visible, it changes how everything else is perceived. So the question doesn't end with that hearing. It extends beyond it. If the process requires documentation, where is it? If claims are made publicly, who investigates them? And if the answers aren't clear, what does that say about the system itself? These aren't questions that can be resolved in a single moment, but they're questions that don't disappear once they're asked. And that's exactly what made this exchange different. It didn't rely on volume or spectacle. It relied on structure, on precision, and on the idea that sometimes the most revealing answer is the one that never comes. Because when the paperwork isn't acknowledged, when the follow-up doesn't happen, and when the silence becomes consistent, it starts to form its own kind of record, one that doesn't need to be written down to be noticed. If this moment proved anything, it's that accountability isn't just about having rules, it's about showing that those rules were followed. And when that proof isn't available, the conversation doesn't end. It evolves. It spreads. And it leaves behind a simple but powerful thought. If even the highest levels of oversight can't produce clear answers, what does that mean for everything else? If you found this breakdown valuable, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next deep dive. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video on the channel.